Canada is becoming a third world country as it now falls to one of the lowest rankings in the OECD for per capita growth. This is not a joke. Canada is literally becoming a third world country, and it's also importing the third world, which is very ironic. So Canada's living standards are falling behind the rest of the developed world. As noted in a new study published by the Fraser Institute from 2002 to 2014, Canada's GDP per person growth roughly kept pace with the rest of the OECD. But from 2014 to 2022, the latest year of available comparable data, Canada's average annual growth rate declined sharply, ranking third lowest among 30 countries over the period. Consequently, in dollar terms, Canada's GDP per person increased only $1,325 during the time period, compared to the OECD average increase of $5,070. So I want to show you what's going on here. And obviously, this isn't amazingly accurate because you look who's top in the chart there, which is Ireland. And that's no coincidence that Ireland is at the top. That's mainly driven by the amount of tech companies that are storing all their intellectual property in Ireland. But you look at Poland. Poland has had a massive increase in GDP per capita, one of the highest. And when you look at Poland's migration, actually, let's get that up on a chart. So if you look at Poland's population, they had a spike here, which was just due to the war, obviously, and being in such close proximity to that. But since the yearly population growth has gone down a massive amount. However, when you look at what's going on here with this report, you can see that actually their GDP per capita is going up, which is very, very interesting. You've got Hungary, Turkey, Slovak Republic, Korea, Czech Republic, Portugal, New Zealand, United States, some of the top performers where wealth and prosperity is actually rising in those countries. You go down to the bottom and you can see Canada all the way at the bottom here, just 0.6%. This is from 2014, guys, to 2022. So we're talking about an 8-year time period, and the prosperity and wealth in Canada has only gone up 0.6%. I mean, that is just completely insane and just shows you how bad the economy is. But if you think of what's happened since 2014, you've got to look at how more financialized the economy has become. Obviously, since rates went down in 2015, and that was under conservative leadership, might I add. But since those rates went down, you had the housing market that was just going crazy back then. Then the Liberals took over. Everything got a lot worse. The housing market became even more financialized. More and more capital, which would have gone to productive investment, got sucked up by the housing bubble and the housing market. And it's led to this essentially. It's leading to the economy's own demise, which is really interesting and kind of ironic when you think about it. That housing bubble eventually leads to the demise of the country's economy, which then implodes the housing bubble in itself as well, which is what we're seeing as Canada is essentially in a depression. And then this by policy options, you can see how Canada has fallen. In 1981, it was in the top 10 countries in the OECD 19 countries. And then since then in 2021, it has declined massively. So again, you're seeing Canada that is just falling down the rankings, and that's just expected to continue and go on and go on. And we've just got so much red tape regulation which is going on. We've got inflation, a cost of living crisis. It's just all impacting Canada all at the same time. And this report interestingly came out from Scotiabank, from Derek Holt. And it's really interesting because this was before the Bank of Canada came in and cut rates. And you've got to listen to this and see some of these charts. The Bank of Canada's core inflation gauges were hot again in high frequency month over month terms last month. That's something we've been discussing many times on this channel. 2 back-to-back months of hot core gauges support my thesis that the first 4-month period this year was a transitory soft patch for inflation, and now we're bouncing back from it. The Bank of Canada is still likely to cut next week, and they did, but choosing to do so would put full faith in the Bank of Canada's sketchy forecasting abilities while casting aside data dependency and fresher information on the evolving shock to the global supply chains that may matter to trade-dependent countries like Canada. And then he points to shipping costs here, which you can see once again are absolutely skyrocketing. And then if you go down to some of these charts, you can obviously see year over year, core inflation measures are actually down. But if you actually get into the nuance here, you begin to see that things are actually much hotter. Goods and core inflation weighed down the headline CPI reading. Services inflation was hot again and drove strong trimmed mean and weighted CPI readings. You can see that here, and you can see how service inflation is still quite hot, around 5%. And then you've got the shelter costs. This is just hilarious, guys, because if you look at these measures, they're going down, and it's not really the case. Obviously, this comes from Statistics Canada. It's the Bank of Nova Scotia's charts, but rents continue to explode in Canada, sorry. And then you look at Canada rent inflation, and it's exploded to another high. So once again, Canada rent inflation is now at 8.9%, a new record high. And you've got the Bank of Canada coming in and cutting interest rates. Again, they're not cutting interest rates because they got it right with inflation. They're cutting interest rates because of the political pressures surrounding the housing market and the housing bubble that is imploding, and the effect that that's having obviously on the banks, and they can obviously see that in the repo market as well. So when you've got inflation this high for rent inflation, obviously that's going to take money away from the economy. Most of that money is going straight towards the banks because it's all going to be allocated towards mortgage payments, which have absolutely skyrocketed in Canada, obviously with the rates increasing so much. And still, in no Canadian city is the rent going to cover the mortgage. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. You look at the speculation going on in Calgary, but still it would not cover the mortgage, which is key. And then the Fraser Institute says average Canadian family pays 43% of its income to taxes, more than the necessities of life. So it's got food, housing, clothing. You know, I would argue housing 22%, that is pretty low. Obviously 43% taxes. A lot of people are blissfully unaware about all the hidden taxes and the tax on tax. I mean, just think about it. Your paycheck is taxed, and then you have to go and pay tax on everything that you buy. You have to pay carbon taxes if you go and buy gas, which is essentially a necessity, and that does put pressure on food prices because it increases the transportation costs. So basically, they are totally correct. The amount of money that people are allocating towards taxes has gone through the roof, and so has government spending. You see, the problem is, without people realizing that the reason that they're paying so much money in taxes, whether that's unknowingly paying it, because again, the CP lie, as Thomas Sowell said, is exactly that. It's a tax. Inflation is the most hidden tax of them all. And people, when they're paying high amounts of inflation, you know, they think all this free money is coming for free, like it was in 2020 and 2021. And then 2022, 2023, they are paying for it, and they are paying double for it because they're also paying the taxes as well. So the economic distortions that you get from big government essentially lead to a massive amount of your paycheck going towards taxes. And again, a lot of that is hidden. A lot of that is taxes that they don't even realize that they're paying, and it compounds very, very quickly. So it's very interesting, this report. I would highly recommend that you go check it out and read the whole thing. I will link it below. It's very, very interesting. But obviously, what is going on here with the growth rate of per capita GDP going down this much? And you've got to remember, the top 10% in Canada, their per capita GDP is going up, and that's all at the expense of the poor and the middle class. So the poor and middle class, they're being obliterated. Their per capita GDP has probably gone completely the other way. I mean, if you look at the case of places like Alberta, that's actually been put into articles many, many times about the per capita GDP. And now with the massive amount of inflation and having one of the higher inflation rates out of all the provinces, Albertans are some of the worst off people in the country in terms of the big provinces in Canada. So it's very, very bad what's happening here. But when you have a housing bubble, obviously that feeds into the low productivity. Your economy just disintegrates before your eyes. So it's self-reinforcing in a way that this housing bubble will destroy the economy, which then destroys the housing bubble. And it just goes round and round like that. And unfortunately, we are in that doom loop now. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend that you check out this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN to protect your privacy and you want a reliable VPN, then use the affiliate link of this channel, which is expressvpn.com/marketmania. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.